Thank you. And I just want to welcome everybody to the June 15th, 2023 Cells to Society seminar. Our theme today is growing stuff. And we have two wonderful speakers and great colleagues of mine presenting today, Vern Grubinger and Hazelrigg. Vern will talk about greenhouse growing in Vermont, and Anne will talk about plant and disease issues in vegetables and small fruit. And I am just going to talk a little bit briefly about what the Cell Society seminars are. The purpose of these seminars is to promote cross-pollination for sharing research, education, and extension across CALS and across the university. I, together with Hans Estrin and Andrew May, are the organizing team for these seminars, and we welcome your thoughts on new themes and new topics, and maybe even your willingness to present on a topic in the future at any point. Grateful to Kathy Yandow, Tina Haskins, and Joanna Cummings for supporting us with communication and promotion. That said, I'm going to move right into the presentations today. We can wrap up the session talking about what's coming next in our schedule of Cells to Society seminars and out-of-the-box brainstorm sessions. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Vern Grubinger.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Pleasure to be here with you. And I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of high tunnels in Vermont and highlight a few of the key issues in their operation. What is a high tunnel? Well, it's a greenhouse, but every greenhouse isn't a high tunnel. So we go to the Vermont Department of Taxes for a very good definition, because high tunnels are not taxable and greenhouses are, and the difference is that a high tunnel can be removed. So essentially, there's no concrete in the foundation of a high tunnel, and it's not always a bright line. I'll give you some examples, but clearly this Longwind Farm greenhouse with all that permanent structure is not a high tunnel. And then structures like these called caterpillars, which are really impermanent, probably aren't high tunnels. Some people might think they are, but they're very temporary and 3-season rather than 4. And certainly these low tunnels that are just plastic on little metal hoops are not high tunnels, but the principle's all the same. We're getting some solar gain. We're protecting the crop from the elements and extending the season. So this is an important technology in a climate like ours that has a short growing season, erratic weather, and a lot of high value perishable crops. A lot of this work was instigated by Dr. Otho Wells at UNH, who established this research farm on the campus that started looking at these kind of modified low-cost greenhouses called high tunnels, and he did it in collaboration with a grower. Ed Person started fabricating these on his own farm, and this original design was promulgated for many years. It's simply metal hoops covered by a single layer of plastic with manual roll-up sides for ventilation and drip irrigation, sometimes with plastic mulch inside, sometimes without, and that's it. No power, no fans, no heating, and you get a couple extra weeks of growing from protection from cold weather. But the big factor really is getting control of diseases and other damage from rainfall, winds, etc., and some extra growth from the warmth that accumulates. Today, there are all kinds of iterations of that design. That design's actually pretty outdated. People aren't building those anymore. They tend to be larger and wider and have more bells and whistles. But you can see here at Walker Farm in my hometown of Dummerston, kind of the evolution over time from their original few tunnels, which you can see to the left there, to the larger structures that have been put up, and they all are in use today. And it's not atypical to find vegetable farms with 5, 10, 15, 20 of these structures now. They're really proliferating, and it's almost impossible to find a commercial vegetable farm that does not have a high tunnel in New England these days. Depending on what you grow and when you market and a lot of other factors, that will inform the design that one uses, and whether it's the type of doors to have access to tractors or not, or the mulch on the ground to control weeds or not, drip irrigation, goes on, and certainly price is a factor in what's selected here. Another big factor is ability to withstand snow load in the winter and to allow crops like tomatoes to get as large as their potential allows. We really don't have very good data on how many of these structures are out there. This is the latest census, 2017, so it's already outdated, but the numbers don't really add up. We know there are a lot more than 220 farms growing vegetables in high tunnels, 3 or 4 times that probably, but we don't have a good count. Vegetable transplants, 34 farms, probably 10 times that. Fruits, same thing. So that's weird. And also they don't do a good job with diversification in the census. So it shows 500 farms, but many of these farms are overlapping. It's the same farm. So there's that. But if you take the numbers they provide, there are 64 acres undercover, and this would be a mixture of the few large glass greenhouses we have, and all the rest would be plastic covered high tunnels. So it's pretty significant when you get to the economics, and I'll end with that. 3 common systems that you see are the summer growing in the bottom right there, winter production, which is a little bit of a misnomer because in the dead of winter, nothing's really growing. It's sort of on hold. The growth is late fall, early spring, and these are only cold tolerant crops. And then the production of seedlings, container items, flower baskets, bedding plants, etc. And that tends to be up on benches. So here are some pictures of farms around the state. The simple approach to summer crops, no additional heating. The ventilation is from roll-up sides, open end walls, sometimes a ridge vent that opens. And of course, almost all of these tunnels have drip irrigation because a lot of watering is required. There's no rainfall and it's warm in there. Crops need a lot of water. This is a lovely flower farm in Charlotte. And then a similar structure for winter growing, Starksboro, one addition being the use of row covers in the winter to keep some of that ground heat down close to the crop, although that's not always used with spinach, but for the other cold hardy crops, row covers are pretty much required. And then you start to get into more complications, like this tunnel has 2 furnaces, a gas furnace and a corn/pellet furnace. It's got fans for moving air around inside called horizontal airflow. It's got some automated vents. It has electrical outlets, and some tunnels have ground heat, tubes of hot water in the soil. So you can add a lot to these, and it's still called a high tunnel, but it's got a lot of the elements that you would find in permanent greenhouses that are more like, buildings with all of their utilities. A few farms have messed around with this idea of moving the tunnels. So you grow your warm season summer crop in one location, and then as that completes, the harvest is done or almost done, you slide that tunnel over onto the crop that you're going to hold through the winter and continue to grow in the spring. And it's tricky. These things are not insubstantial, so figuring out how to move them. Some farmers just drag them on tracks with tractors. This farm has a rolling system. In the end, I don't believe it's worth it for the cost of the tunnels and the payback, which is usually 1 or 2 years. It's simpler to just build another tunnel and put all the labor and time to trying to move it, but there are a few adherents to this system. A lot of tunnels are set up for a specific function, so this is a straight up seedling production house. It's got benches that don't necessarily move. It's got the heating pads for getting things going and just what you need to do that. Some growers will take these benches out and then grow in the ground. Again, sometimes it's simpler to just have dedicated houses and build another one if you have other needs. Large areas are covered sometimes for just 3 seasons to do things like grow strawberries and raspberries, and this is Four Corners Farm with a large, what they call haygrove tunnel, and the gutter connection means you have multiple hoops, as you see here, all in a single structure. And to the left there, you can see there's where the place where they come together, and there's a gutter usually to connect to capture the water and let it out, or some other system. So I said earlier, 3 season greenhouses aren't necessarily high tunnels, but people do consider these to be high tunnels, so it's just a matter of semantics. But this is really about a lot of protection from the elements for these high value perishable crops and some season extension. Then at the other end is something that again is so sort of removable. Is it really a high tunnel? It's these things are right on the line, but a really low cost system for protecting flowers here, using conduit, electrical conduit, wood scraps, and Pamakalas have found a way to be really frugal in this system. Although I saw on our veg and berry listserv, these are up for sale, and they're actually the next generation is coming in and is going for a higher quality system. High Meadows Farm, Putney has grown raspberries in tunnels for quite a while, and you can get raspberries right into November this way and keep the water off. The quality is really high. You know, this is valuable real estate though, so to have a crop sitting there all year long that's producing fruit for just a couple months, when you push a pencil, you know, running a bunch of lettuce crops through there or having tomatoes is definitely more economically advantageous. But for a lot of these farms, diversification is important, and having a lot of things to market is important. So again, build another tunnel and grow something else in it. Pretty unusual, but here's Andrew Farmer down in Southwest Vermont, who's quite a fantastic grower and provides hardy grape stock to a lot of other farms, and he's growing some grapes for his own consumption / marketing in a high tunnel. Again, the importance of keeping the elements off of these crops to maintain their quality really can't be overstated, because a couple of heavy rainstorms when things are ripe and ready to be harvested pretty much means the demise of most of your sales. Sometimes tunnels are used simply to get an edge on the market because things are pushed along. So even though, again, the economics of doing this isn't that compelling, but getting your potatoes to market early can have a side effect of helping you sell a lot of other crops earlier or capture market with a certain retailer wholesale market. And of course, the quality, again, is pretty darn good in there. Long story short, tomatoes are the dominant crop in these high tunnels because they use the vertical space. The market demand is pretty much insatiable, and their response to this environment is so dramatic. The yields are 5 to 10 times what you get out in the field. So that's probably, 3/4 of all tunnel production is high tunnel tomatoes in our neck of the woods. And you can see we did a study across New England with almost 20 farms, looking at a lot of different factors, but one of them was yield, and this is pounds per square foot. You can see the higher management, longer season production are pushing 5 pounds a square foot, and then you have some farms, usually some combination of shorter season and less intensive management, where they're only getting a pound or two, but in the field, it's more like 1/2 pound per square foot. So you can see why these structures pay back so fast, because the production is remarkably improved. And the other factor, of course, is marketable yield, which this is. The defects are so minimal in a greenhouse, whereas you get all the kind of splitting and cracking and things like that, blemishes out in the field. And when you look at these longer production houses from May to November, you can just see the quantity of biomass that gets produced in a very short time. So we have conventional growers that use synthetic materials, and some of them use a system that has kind of a potting soil mix and synthetic fertilizers in a bag. And these are a lot easier to manage in terms of nutrients because they're formulated properly, and you can put soluble fertilizers on a pretty formulaic basics through the drip system. It's a lot more challenging with in-ground organically oriented systems. It's much more of a black box of what's in there and what's going to come out. So I started working on this about 20 years ago, and Becky Madden has followed up, and we're getting better and better at it. One of the challenges is you take a transplant, stick it in the ground there. This is not about a regular soil test that predicts what will be available within a few months. It's like that day, it's warm, it's moist, the plant's ready to go. So you need to know about both the soluble nutrients and what's in reserve for later. most soil tests, it's really just about the reserve. So that is not helpful. And the other issue is that there are aspects we want to measure in soil in a tunnel that we don't pay so much attention to out in the field. One of them being soluble salts, which is not a problem in the field because of rain and snow, and the salts are never accumulate to a level that is harmful to plants. And also the available forms of nitrogen are changing so much in the field, we don't tend to track them as much. There are some tests, but it's not as critical. But in the tunnel, both these things are really important to know, especially before you plant, so you can make adjustments. So we've landed on using two types of tests, the potting soil test, which is a saturated media extract, and the regular field soil test to get measures of both of these. And we've worked for many years with the University of Maine Soil Test Lab that's now developed this long-term high tunnel test, which is, as far as I know, the one of its kind in the country where you really get the tests and the recommendations for tomatoes in particular in a tunnel. In the tunnel, salts is a concern, as I mentioned, because you have evaporation that keeps bringing them to the surface, much like vegetable production in the desert. And if you don't either mix these in well deeper into the soil each year or take the cover off and let rain and snow leach them away, you can harm plants, especially if you're trying to germinate leafy greens after you've grown tomatoes or something. And you can see the white crust forming on the surface, but that's extreme. The salts accumulate before you have visible indications of a problem. Where these things are sited is really important because you're growing in them when the snow is melting, when there's intense rain, and if they're just flat on the field, especially heavy soils, the water is going to infiltrate and create mud and move heat away from the soil that's in the tunnel. So, planning ahead for all of this moisture being shed and not getting into the tunnel is important. And then, of course, snow load is something else to be ready for. If you're going to get in there with a tractor or a plow or something to remove it, every year when we have big snows and then it rains after, there are some tunnels that collapse because this hasn't been accounted for. And in some locations in Vermont, the snow can be considerable. And there's not not a lot of good options here, but you certainly want your tunnel to be constructed in a way to bear this kind of load. Keeping the heat in the tunnel is something people are working on. So the soil has a lot of thermal mass and retains a lot of heat, but you will get losses at the edges. So people do things like insulate those edges with foam. And then, of course, if you're growing any number of months away from our regular growing season, you need to provide some supplemental heat if you're going to grow tropical or subtropical crops. And when you have a lot of tunnels and you're doing a lot of that kind of growing, there is a lot of fuel involved to make that heat. And not the cost and the greenhouse gas emissions can be significant. So Chris and I were involved in a multi-year project. I can't even remember, was it 7, 8 years? It went on for quite a while. We cost shared with growers to let them put in all kinds of different systems, trying to move away from the standard propane and oil systems that are pretty compelling. They work really well. They're reliable. You turn a dial, you do some annual maintenance, but mostly you walk away. And that's important when you're a busy farmer. Some of these other renewable energy systems require a lot of your time and effort. This is an extreme example of heating with wood, and it works for David Blaze because he was a logger in the winter, but most other people don't have better things to do than be filling their boilers full of logwood in the middle of the night. And so one system that we landed on is pretty promising and has been installed on a dozen or more farms is this automated system that uses either shell corn or wood pellets or some combination in place of a gas or oil furnace, ideally supplemental to those furnaces, so you have backup if something goes wrong with these. And you can take that heat and move it all around. And Chris worked with, let's see, this was Riverberry Farm up in Fairfax, to take one of those corn pellet furnaces I just showed you and take the hot water it generated and be able to direct it either into the soil for a crop like greenhouse tomato, or onto benches for starting your seedlings, or in the air, because you do have to keep the air warm. Just heating the ground is not enough to provide the heat for both. There are simpler techniques for keeping the plants warmer. One is just get them up off the ground into raised beds, and a lot of sites people try and grow on, the soil is compacted or there isn't enough soil. So essentially you make a raised bed and bring in your own soil and have the greenhouse function that way. For the winter growers, chickweed emerged as a really big problem. Its eco habitat lets it thrive in the fall and winter, and it can be really competitive. And most of these crops are smaller than kale, typically spinach. So it can ruin the profitability of a spinach crop if it's out of control. And growers came up with this idea of using soil steaming to control the weed seeds, and it also controls diseases. And this is Piccadilly Farm in Winchester that's got a newer model. People started with old steamers from tobacco country in Ontario, and Becky Madden got a grant and managed a study showing the economics and the effectiveness of doing soil steaming at different temperatures to control chickweed, and also worked with Deb Nair, plant and soil science, looking at the biology, soil microbiology impacts of steaming. But this is something that's quite popular among a small number of growers that have a fair amount of winter greens production. And the steam is applied through a sock or a hose, and it's kept in the soil with this tarp that's weighted down. You can see a little bit of the steam leaking out here. So you're heating the soil to 160 degrees plus or minus to kill the weed seeds in the top couple inches. Grafting is a thing to control soil-borne diseases, and it's really common in Asia, and here it took off starting 15-20 years ago, and now it's pretty standard for a lot of tomato growers to either do this themselves or buy the grafted plants. And it's a lot like what apple orchards have done for many decades, is take a hardy, vigorous rootstock, put the fruiting genetics that you want on top of it, and you get the best of both worlds. So I'll end with just some of the economics. Why would you do this? Again, the data is a little all over the board. These were the enterprise budgets I've been able to find for high tunnel tomatoes. And I don't know what's going on. Penn State with only 50 cents a square foot net returns. Part of it is, if you look at that budget, they're only estimating like $1.50 sales price per pound for tomatoes, which is a fraction of what is typical. But on average, if you take these together and say there's a $2.33 net per square foot, your typical high tunnel is giving you almost $7,000 in profit. So you're going to pay back that tunnel in a year or two, depending on how you build it. And then it's pretty incredible to realize this is $100,000 an acre in profit on these things. So that's why you find them on almost all the vegetable farms. And again, tomatoes is probably at the high end of a lot of the crops, but certainly floral crops are right up there too, and herbs and things like that. So it's a really important technology for the viability of vegetable farms in our region. Still a lot of research and outreach needs out there. I won't read them off to you, but we've got plenty more to do as we continue to watch these structures proliferate across our agricultural landscape. And that's what I have for you today, and happy to take questions now or after Ann gives her presentation.
Thanks, Vern. Great overview and summary of this technology and practice. I'd like to move right into Ann's presentation if we can, and we'll take questions at the end.
All right. Okay, so sharing, I go to
should be the upper right corner.
Yeah.
Just to the left of the
And then
select the PowerPoint slideshow window that you may have open.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's no, that's team. Huh.
It looks like you might have pressed shared desktop, and there's a better choice.
All right. What does that look like?
Let me press my share screen button and I can tell you.
So stop share, Ann, for a second.
Stop share.
And if you go to your PowerPoint window first and hit F5 to get in the slideshow.
F5. Wow.
Okay, I'm going to let Chris. Chris has a different method.
So somewhere on your computer, you've got a slideshow from PowerPoint.
Well, okay. It's loaded. It's loaded on now.
Okay.
It's on my desktop.
Okay, great. So then if you go back to Teams.
Okay.
And click share.
Yeah.
And then in that box, you'll see you have the option to share a screen or share a window.
Oh, okay, so I should share screen.
Window. No,
Oh,
share window.
Shoot.
This may work. You got it. Stick with it.
Got it.
You're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks. You know, I don't do, I do more things on Zoom, it seems like, than Teams. So I'm not really very.
We all
keen
should.
with
We all should. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about pest and disease issues in vegetables and small fruit. And I really kind of was concentrated on what I've been seeing lately. So, you know, the past winter and early this spring, because boy, the calls are building up. So my job with UVM Extension, I'm a plant pathologist. I work in the plant diagnostic clinic. Every land grant university has one of these. We're located in Jeffords Hall, and basically these diagnostic clinics are there to help commercial growers primarily and home gardeners figure out disease, insect, and weed issues in their crops, and then help identify it and then make recommendations for control. So I probably get 500 samples a year, but it's a combination now of physical and photo samples. I get so many, everybody's got a smartphone now, so it's great that farmers can just send me a picture, and then I might have an answer back to them within 3 minutes of them sending me the picture. So that's really good. I've done a couple of those already today, and one's a stumper, so that's Vern can help with that one. We cover all crops. You know, UVM is small, Vermont is small, so we have to cover all crops. Whereas if you're a diagnostic clinic in Florida, you've got the citrus person, you've got the home garden person, but we're kind of a one-person show. I do have some help in the clinic now, which is really nice. Like I said, I handle commercial and home gardener. Most of the home gardener things we want to go through the UVM Master Gardener helpline, and they're housed in my lab 1 day a week. They answer the phone and computer questions, and then we've sort of pivoted this Master Gardener helpline to an online platform. So now we're getting a lot of questions all online, and they can upload pictures. So that takes care of a lot of our home garden samples, which is great. But I'm sort of backup for the master gardeners. If they don't know what's going on, I can look at the pictures and chime in. So in the clinic, you know, I reach out to everybody because, you know, Vern helps me, Becky Madden, Chris Callahan has helped a lot with storage issues. And then I have colleagues all across New England and the US that people are so good about helping out and looking at pictures. And like Vern said, there's a weekly call that I'm usually on for vegetable issues that we can share pictures and get other people's opinions. It's kind of a stump the chump session every week. So some of the samples that I've had so far this year, you know, centered around the frost. A lot of that May 18th low temperature injury. Saw a lot of damage in grapes and apples, which Terry Bradshaw's, well, and that's what Leslie did yesterday, probably assessed damage around the state. Some of our blueberry growers got hit, but luckily I don't think things were, blueberries weren't in bloom, so I don't think the blooms got hit. And same thing with strawberries. I think they avoided the frost damage. But a lot of our trees and shrubs, landscape plants, had damage from the frost. Yeah, Vern, I don't know if you know if any of the blueberry growers, was anything in flower? Maybe something could have been in
Yeah,
flower.
there was definitely some damage to both blueberries and strawberries, depending on the location.
All right. Yeah, I was in Montpelier, and basically all their oak trees had been nailed by the frost. It was really amazing. And so everybody always jumps to the conclusion that it's some disease that's running rampant throughout the oaks, and they've all heard of like this new disease called oak wilt. And so part of my job is settling people down, making them relax, telling them it's not as big a deal as they think. This was a picture I got earlier on in the year. Well, the grower didn't send one nearly this nice, but a blueberry grower was seeing this in his fields. It's a blueberry stem gall caused by a little wasp. Basically, just clip it out and destroy it. So starting off in the spring, you know, when Vern and I started, there weren't that many growers, you know, growing year round, but now people are in high tunnels year round. And some of the old time veg growers that we've talked to, they've said, oh my gosh, these young growers, we just wanted to take the winter off. And then there are all these young people coming up that want to keep going all year round. So I get samples and pictures throughout the year, but in the spring, it's probably the busiest. And usually in the springtime, mainly what I see is all either abiotic stuff, you know, non-infectious problems, or if it is a disease problem, it's usually a root rot. And so I see a lot of samples with damping off. That's the picture on the left. It's just when soils are cold and wet, there are about 4 or 5 different fungi that start sort of outrunning the plants and attack the roots, and growers can lose entire plantings if the, you know, conditions are cold and wet. So like Vern was saying, a lot of people use heat mats, anything they can do to get those seedlings up quickly, it will help you avoid this damping off problem. The other one is a crown rot. That's another cold, wet soil disease. The picture on the right is a tomato stem that, you know, probably in the top part of the plant, they were seeing dieback in the foliage. But I always tell people, when you see dieback in the foliage, always look lower. And sure enough, if you look lower, there's a rot right at that soil line where it was cold and wet. So those are some of our main problems early on in the season. So that was probably in the last couple of months. Again, this was sent by a grower, another, I think that's basil. I can't totally tell, but maybe it's a pepper, but yeah, crown rot right at that soil line. So it's really hard in these high tunnels if they don't have heat to try to predict the weather conditions, and you seed things and all of a sudden it's cold and cloudy and you've watered and things just sit there wet. So it's really tough, especially in these unheated tunnels. This was another sample I got, probably this was somebody's parsley planting, and you know, it's sort of hit or miss, but anytime you see that rapid dieback like that, you know, I always tell the grower, I always ask what the root system looks like. And it's so funny, people don't really think that's the first thing they should do, is dig up the plant, take a look at that root system, because that's probably where the problem is originating. So with some of these diseases, I don't know if the soil steaming will, you know, take off enough, but it could possibly help with some of these soil-borne diseases. But a lot of growers also try using root shield, which is a fungus that kind of a good fungus that helps the plant battle some of these root rots. Another one, this was an entire spinach, whole line of spinach that had just sort of rotted off at the roots, right at the crown. So again, just cold, wet soils. And I don't know why, you know, why one whole line was so bad, but probably, I mean, if you look at where that the drip tube is, that row probably just got way too much water. So pictures like that are great because they kind of tell the whole story. I used to go out in the field more, but it's, you know, it's expensive to go out in the field and look at things. So, you know, it is great that everybody's got cell phones and can take pictures. Cold damage, have had a lot of questions about that. Mainly, you know, not from commercial growers, because I don't think they had much outside, but home gardeners, there were some that had things outside during that cold snap. I don't know why gardeners put things out before Memorial Day. It's just nuts. But anyway, that rapid death of tissue, purpling of tissue, really common cold damage symptoms. And then there's all this abiotic weirdness that goes on. Like I said, early on in the season, it's almost always something abiotic. If it's not a root rot, it's something abiotic, because the pathogens don't really, the foliar pathogens don't really kick in till a little bit later when it gets warmer and probably more humid. So these were a couple pictures I got recently. You know, the picture on the left with the tomato, anytime I see leaf edge dieback, tells me for some reason the plant hasn't gotten enough water out to those leaf edges. So, you know, tell the grower to look at the roots. Do the roots look okay? Does the stem look okay? Could you have missed watering, or did it get really hot and sunny? So I think this might have been right around that, the 90-degree temperatures. So, you know, water issues are a big abiotic problem. Heat injury also can be another big problem. Sun scald. So that might be what the other plant is showing. I get a lot of bug pictures also. You know, I can handle insect stuff. I'm pretty good on the home gardener level. I feel competent enough, but once it's a commercial grower, that's when I always tend to involve Margaret Skinner, Cheryl Sullivan, because they really know their stuff. So I might get the picture, and that's something that I'll send on. This guy, on the picture on the left, he said, "What aphid is this?" And that's as clear as the picture was. So, you know, we had to try to get him to send some samples in to Margaret and Cheryl to really take a look and try to identify the aphid. And the insect on the right, he thought that was a pest. That's a ladybug larvae. So with every sample that comes in and picture, there's always an opportunity to educate growers. And I don't charge growers for samples. A lot of the labs do, but I just feel like as long as I can get grants and support the lab, I don't want to have getting a diagnosis be a deterrent, having to pay for a diagnosis as being a deterrent. Because one thing we're always trying to do is use IPM, like the very last resort for these things should be using a pesticide. So a lot of times we can give management recommendations that don't involve a pesticide. This is one that I got recently from a grower up in the islands. They thought these were mealybugs, and luckily they sent me a picture. It's a sow bug, and I guess it was, I'd never really seen them do a lot of damage, but they were really feeding on their greenhouse cucumbers, I think that was. This was a real problem this past year, is seed corn maggot. There are these various maggots. There's onion maggot, cabbage maggot, and seed corn maggot. Seed corn maggot attacks a wider range of crops, whereas onion pretty much attacks onion, and cabbage maggot attacks cabbage. But this was a grower. They were starting, they were really a bedding plant place, not a vegetable place, but they had planted all these little tomatoes, and they were all attacked by seed corn maggot. And I had never seen, I had always seen seed corn maggot like at the root system, you know, where the, feeding on the roots. But this one, they had tunneled into the stem of the tomatoes, and it was pretty amazing. But that was on that veg call all around New England. Everybody was having seed corn maggot issues. And it's typically a problem when we have cold, wet springs. Some years it's worse than others. So this year tended to be a really bad year. And once the soils warm up, they're not so much an issue anymore. But that was an interesting one for me. I'd never seen them in the stem of plants. This was sent by a big greenhouse grower in Chittenden County. She just wanted to know, what the heck is this weed? So that's the other thing, we cover weed issues also. And, you know, some stuff I know, but again, I reach out to the Pringle Herbarium, Dave Barrington, Michael Sundu for some of my weed identification things. not so much in vegetable plants, but you know, probably more in pastures and other things like that. This was liverwort. And this can be a real problem in high tunnels, you know, with wet, cloudy soils, you know, things get wet, and it's tough to get rid of, but it's kind of an interesting weed issue. This was one that Vern sent that he just got pictures of, which is, I always like this disease. It's because it's so easy to diagnose. It's called club root, and it only attacks brassicas, causes these big knotty galls on the root systems. And what you notice is, you notice that the plant looks weak. It's sort of wilting during the day, dying back, and then as soon as you dig up that root system, you know you've got this club root. I worked on this a couple different trips to Nepal. This is a real problem in Nepal because their soil pHs are like 4.5, and so this pathogen attacks at low soil pH. So one of the control measures for this is trying to raise the pH up above 7, and then you can do that. That's great if you're just a brassica grower, but on our small diversified farms, it gets a little bit tricky because you may not want it that high for potatoes, because a potato disease, you want it, you know, the pathogen scab is more of a problem at high pHs. So it's a little bit tricky with rotations. And it's a pretty interesting disease because it releases sort of a motile swimming spore. So it really, in the terraced fields of Nepal, the rain would just carry this clubroot pathogen right down into the next field. And these guys were really dependent on the brassicas for a lot of their income. But that was kind of a fun one. This was another one that came to me recently. It was it's onion thrips. I think that we had that really short bout of 90-degree weather, and it was really hot and dry there for a while, and onion thrips just take off. They're little teeny weeny insects that you have to sort of pull apart those lower leaves to look down in there for them, but they cause that stippling damage. That's really pretty diagnostic. And then you can see their feces on there too. That's another, that helps to diagnose thrips. But they're feeding way down under there, and they can just explode in the hot, dry weather. So this was going to be a problem, that he was putting these transplants out there, and they're so inundated with thrips right in the beginning of their life cycle. Usually we'd see it later on in the summer, when it's been really hot and dry. So he was going to try to hit them with some organic insecticides, see if that could slow them down. And probably this cool, wet weather has slowed the whole thing down too. Okay, Vern, here's the one. This was from a high tunnel grower. It's his entire bed of peppers. And before I knew it was a high tunnel, these were in high tunnel. You know, I've seen damage like that that's caused by black plastic with peppers. It sort of burns the stem. And a lot of times peppers outdoors can have a wind whip thing, and they can get sort of a twisted, it can twist a part of their stem all about the same height. And so, but this is in a high tunnel, so it's not in black plastic, and there shouldn't be a lot of wind. He said, well, maybe something happened that that I didn't know about, like the cover wasn't on or something. But I don't know, Vern, what do you think? I mean, the only other thing I could think of was climbing cutworm, but.
Are they on plastic in the tunnel?
No, they weren't.
I'd say something happened at the transplant seedling stage. They got some kind of abrasion, and the pathogen moved in afterwards. Rhizoctonia, pythium, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then that's kind of the way. Yeah, it looks very abiotic because it's not really extending into the upper part or the lower part. But yeah, everything is really stunted and not in good shape. All right, I don't know what else. Oh, and this is one I just got an hour ago from a high tunnel grower. This is a nice one too. This is the one I could get the answer back to the person with a fact sheet within a few minutes. It's a pretty common disease in high tunnels on tomato. It has a pretty wide host range, but we see it mainly in high tunnel tomatoes. It's called sclerotinia or white mold, and it causes that sort of canker that you can see on the right, and then this real fluffy white mycelia grows, and so that's pretty diagnostic. It's an easy one to diagnose. But this is one that typically you see it in low spots in the greenhouse, really when it's cool and wet. So it's typically hit or miss. The best control is cutting that plant off right at the base, getting it out of there, because that fungus can produce a long-term overwintering structure that you don't want to drop into your greenhouse soils, because it can sit there for years and still be viable. So yeah, pictures are always great, and pictures where they're easy to diagnose are always kind of fun. Not to be at the expense of a grower, though. Okay, that's all I have. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But yeah, it's great. I have no problem reaching out for help with some of these things, and you know, sometimes you just can't. All you can do is rule things out, you know, and try to point them in a direction. But you know, sometimes you don't always get to the exact cause. But hopefully, we do some good along the way.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Vern, both for your presentations. I want to open it up to questions from the group. And Ann, you can stop sharing if you'd like. We can all see each other.
Well, that's a busy desktop, Ann.
Okay, stop sharing. How do I get there? Let's see. Stop
Just
sharing.
upper right corner. Yep, you got it. Good job. So how about some questions from the group? Feel free to unmute. There's relatively few of us live here, so unmute and ask a question.
Well, I don't see any other hands up.
Go for it, Leslie. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you to both of you. That was really interesting. And I do have questions for both of you. Let me see. So for Vern, so with the frost freeze in May, I assume the high tunnels protected many people from damage, but was there much damage of anything in high tunnels with that frost?
Great question. It got extremely cold in some locations, and some of those tunnels are unheated and single layer, and people were concerned. And so row cover is a way to protect, certainly on strawberries and low growing crops. A lot of people did that successfully. There were people pinning row cover with binder clips and clothespin inside the high tunnel, trying to retain some heat. And then some people, you can get emergency kind of heaters that just are temporary to burn some propane, similar to what you would do eating outside at a restaurant, but not that fancy. So there was some loss. I'd say it's more the kind of stuff Ann showed, that, you know, succulent tomatoes are going to show some chilling injury and they'll grow out of it. I don't think there were a lot of losses in high tunnels, except in the very coldest areas.
And then that also reminds me, for heating the high tunnels, what about solar as opposed to propane and wood chips, etc.? How much solar might be used?
Well, I mean, you're getting solar gain. It is a little solar heater. And there's one system we worked with at Old Athens Farm. They put up a whole row, I can't remember what that was, 100 feet of solar panels, hot water panels, to get the hot water and transfer that into the heat. So you can do it. You know, the big challenge with the high tunnel is usually you're only heating for 2 months or so, 2-3 months, a month in the beginning, a month, like you're not heating in the middle of winter. There's not enough light to grow anything. So the payback on that investment, it's not like solar for your home or something. It's so there's a lot of wonderful, sophisticated systems that work well and don't make economic sense for
unless the cost comes down on the technology, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then for Ann, with the explosion of artificial intelligence, and I mean, we just hear about articles every day and ChatGPT and all this stuff, but there must be apps out there that maybe are imperfect that can help identify diseases. And I assume the future is that those apps will just get better and better and better, and people might not have to call in quite so much, or but
Yeah, maybe.
where are things in the world
Leslie,
of
don't push her out the door. We need her.
no, I know, but
Well, right now there's some online things that are probably old school now, but Cornell has a great berry diagnostic tool that you could go on. But yeah, I'm sure there's so much cutting edge stuff coming down the pike that, you know what? I'm a dinosaur, Leslie. I don't even know what's out there. So I'm just going to keep going until some
well,
robot
maybe
tells me to go home.
maybe it should be our app at UVM.
Well, do you have a lot of money to hire a computer person?
One thing I'll chime in, the easy to ID diseases, I think will be identified well by those systems. But yeah, when you have a team of 20 extension people puzzling over what are those curly leaves, and I mean, there's no data to go into an AI system if we can't.
If you don't know what it is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's nuances of things and just getting all the right info and yeah.
And,
yeah,
and
it's
being
tricky,
able
but
to
I'll do
differentiate based on other things that aren't in the photo.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank
And
you.
one example of that is we had some things that were puzzling this year that we think ended up being edema, which is the soils are moist and warm and the air cools down and it's humid and the plants aren't transpiring. So the roots push the water up and the cells essentially explode, or they do something, they get distorted and weird. And so you need all that background information of, oh, that was the condition during the time that this occurred. So a conversation is pretty important. So I think we'll still need people like Ann for a while.
Good.
Yeah, and I think drones, more people are using drones probably out west, to survey fields and look for hot spots of disease and things like that. But we're not there yet.
Other questions for Vern or Ann?
I think the one crop I did see cold damage in, and also at my house, was onions. I mean, I think that was the one thing that was really sort of up and outside during that cold snap, at least for me. And then I heard from some other growers that they were having tip dieback in onions.
So
yeah, we discussed some of those photos on that call, and the interesting factor was microclimates, even within a field. That was kind of the diagnostic thing. You're like, oh, those were down in the lower portion where the cold settled, but not higher. But people were surprised that onions took a hit. Interesting, in my house, my oak is clearly damaged, but no damage to blueberries, strawberries, or
I know the oak thing
raspberries.
was bizarre. It was just bizarre.
I never knew that they were that tender.
No. I think it must have just been the right stage of growth. But yeah, all around Montpelier, it looks like they've been hit by fire. But they should be probably leafing out by now. Again. So
I want to ask you both a question that is motivated by Ann's reference to, a lot of your work or a lot of your time or focus is help, settling people down. So people reach out to you when they're, in the middle of a crisis or, a point of just lack of knowledge around what they're looking at. And I just would love to get a little bit more perspective from both of you on that social service that comes along for the ride with the technical service and educational work that we do. Any thoughts you have on that would be welcome.
Well, we always joke that we never had enough psychology in college to do our jobs. But it's so, I think that's the fascinating thing about working with growers. You'll go on one farm and they're not concerned at all by some insect infestation. You go on another farm and they've got the sprayers lined up. So it's just different personalities, but it's kind of fun to see how everybody operates differently.
I would add that a lot of our work, especially over time, is about creating community and social capital for information sharing, for mutual support among growers, but also the mental well-being of the people we work with. So just having someone to listen and talk to is an important factor. You know, I have no reason I should be doing this, no training, no experience, but it happens where, and Irene was a perfect example, you know, adults on the phone crying about the loss of their, and all you can do is show that you care. There's no answer. The plant problem thing is interesting. So like, and we showed the club root, like that's a pretty serious disease for a farm that grows brassicas and is not going away anytime soon. So how do you, you know, I can relate to like medical doctor, like you're trying to tell someone you got a big problem. You're not trying to freak them out, but you can't be casual either. And there's not a lot they can do. There are some things. So that's the thing I find interesting is calibrating the grower response. So people freak out about things where you can calm them down. Like, hey, that's a common disease. Everyone has it. They get over it. It'll be fine. And then you get something where you're trying to say the opposite of, whoa, you have, you know, one of these outliers that if you don't manage it, you won't be growing brassicas in the future, but you don't want to actually say that.
Thank you both. You both have just been great colleagues to learn from. Yes, on all the technical side of this, but also on that part, you know, establishing relationships and you know, how to work with people in this extension world. So thank you for that personally. I'm going to wrap us up here and just let everybody know that July 13th from 2 to 3 p.m. we have our next out of the box brainstorming session planned. The topics are to be determined, and maybe some will grow out of today's conversation, and maybe you have other ideas you'd like to explore with a small group of colleagues from across CALS at that time. Andrew has just launched a poll. We do like to just check in from time to time to see how these are doing for the CALS community and what sort of impact they're having on you. So if you've learned something new or if you've met somebody new as a result of today's seminar, we'd love to know that. Your feedback's always welcome, and we would love to hear from you. We'd also love anybody who would like to participate in a more active way with Cells to Society. You can always check in with us at go.uvm.edu/cells2society. Great to have everybody today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you, Ann and Vern, very much.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Chris and Andrew.
Bye-bye.
Take care.